Do you know what fear truly looks like? It is not always in screams or fire. It hides in silence, in the breath before chaos begins. In the summer of 1462, silence ruled over Wallachia. Vlad III, the ruler known across Europe as Vlad the Impaler, sat in the darkness, his eyes fixed on the enemy camp of the mighty Ottoman Empire. That night, the moon refused to shine. Somewhere out there was Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the man whose empire seemed untouchable. Yet Vlad planned to strike at him, not out of madness, but out of desperate resolve. This was not just another battle. This was survival, revenge, and defiance, all tangled together. Vlad's story began long before that night. He was born into a world of betrayal and shifting loyalties. His father, Vlad Dracula, had once pledged allegiance to the Ottomans, and as part of that deal, the young Vlad and his brother Radu were taken as hostages to the Ottoman court. There he learned Turkish, studied warfare, and witnessed cruelty that would mark his soul forever. Mehmed, years later, would rise as Sultan. Radu, his own brother, would serve under him. But Vlad, he would never forget his chains. When he finally returned to Wallachia, he swore never again to bow before the crescent banner. From that moment, his life became a war of vengeance. By the early 1660s, Wallachia was caught in the grip of fear. The Ottoman Empire demanded tribute, money, soldiers, loyalty. Vlad refused. He knew submission meant death of freedom. In response, Mehmed sent envoys to remind him of his place. Vlad received them, but instead of bowing, he nailed their turbans to their heads, declaring that if they would not remove their hats before a prince, they should keep them forever. That single act was enough to ignite war. Mehmed gathered an enormous army, close to 90,000 men, and began his march toward Targovesta, the Wallachian capital. Vlad's scouts watched their every move, waiting for the right moment. He knew he couldn't stop the Sultan by defense. He had to strike terror in his heart, and so he planned something no one expected, a direct attack on Mehmed himself. The plan was madness, to ride into the center of the Ottoman camp at night and kill the Sultan. His men thought suicide. Vlad only replied, "Better to die as a free man than live as a slave." On the night of June 17, 1462, the sky was black, the air heavy with the smell of rain and smoke. Vlad's chosen warriors, about 7,000 men, wore Ottoman uniforms taken from fallen enemies. Their faces were painted with soot, their hearts pounded like drums. From the hills they could see the faint glow of thousands of campfires stretching across the plains. The Sultan's tent stood somewhere in the center, surrounded by layers of guards. Vlad whispered to his men, "Strike fast, strike deep, and do not stop until you find the Sultan." The command was given. They rode down into the darkness. The first wave of attack hit the outer guards silently. Knives flashed, throats were cut, and confusion began to spread. Then, all at once, Vlad's men let out a cry so loud it shattered the calm. The camp erupted in panic. Horses neighed wildly, tents caught fire, and the smell of burning fabric filled the air. In the chaos, no one knew who was friend or foe. Vlad's soldiers shouted in Turkish, pretending to be Ottoman officers, giving false orders that turned Mehmed's camp into madness. Arrows flew in every direction. Smoke rose thick enough to hide the stars. Vlad himself rode at the front, cutting through everything in his path. He fought like a man possessed, his blade flashing under the faint light of fire. Witnesses later said he seemed unstoppable, his horse covered in blood, his armor dented, yet his eyes cold as stone. He moved toward the center where the Sultan's tent stood, slashing his way through lines of guards. But the Sultan had powerful protectors. The Janissaries formed a human wall around him, fighting fiercely. In the darkness and smoke, Vlad's men lost their bearings. The target slipped away. Mehmed survived by inches, carried off by his guards before Vlad could reach him. The attack raged for hours. The Ottomans fought among themselves, unable to tell enemies from allies. Flames devoured supply wagons, and screams echoed through the valley. By dawn, the ground was black with ash and blood. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers lay dead, their bodies scattered across the plains. Vlad pulled his men back toward the forests, their torches dying as the sun began to rise. The attack had failed to kill Mehmed, but it had succeeded in its true goal, to terrify the empire. Never before had the Sultan faced such chaos within his own camp. When Mehmed surveyed the battlefield that morning, even he was shaken. The destruction was immense. Horses lay tangled with men, tents burned to nothing, and the smell of death hung heavy. His generals urged him to continue the campaign, but as they advanced toward Trgoviste, they came upon something no one could have imagined: an entire field stretching for miles, lined with stakes, upon each a body. Over 20,000 impaled corpses of Ottoman soldiers, merchants, and captives. The sight was so grotesque, so overwhelming, that even the conqueror of Constantinople fell silent. The Sultan's chroniclers later wrote that Mehmed turned his horse away, murmuring, "What can one do against a man who does this to his enemies?" The army's morale broke. Some soldiers refused to march forward, fearing they would become the next forest of death. Mehmed realized that to continue was to invite disaster. The Ottomans retreated. Vlad had done the impossible. He had forced an empire to withdraw. But victory came at a price. His land was in ruins, his people starved, and his enemies were everywhere. For a time, Wallachia was safe, but Vlad's enemies were not done. Soon after, his brother Radu, who had served the Ottomans faithfully, was sent with another army to dethrone him. Many of Vlad's own boyars, nobles who once supported him, now turned against him. They saw in him not a savior, but a tyrant. Betrayed by those closest to him, he fled north to seek help from Hungary's King Matthias Corvinus. But instead of aid, he found imprisonment. For over a decade, he was kept a political prisoner, his legend growing even as he sat behind walls. The tales of his cruelty spread across Europe, some true, some twisted by rumor. When Vlad was finally released, he returned to a country broken by war and divided by loyalty, yet his fire had not dimmed. He gathered his supporters once more and reclaimed his throne for a brief moment in 1476. But fate had other plans. In a skirmish against Ottoman forces, he was killed. His head was cut off and sent to Mehmed in Constantinople, displayed on a spear for all to see. His body was buried in secret, the exact spot lost to time. The man who had once ruled through terror vanished into history. Yet death did not silence his name. Across Europe, travelers and merchants told stories of the Impaler Prince, the man who fought empires with horror as his sword. In time, these tales merged with myth, giving birth to the vampire legends that would one day become famous under another name, Dracula. But behind the legend was a real ruler, a man shaped by pain, captivity, and the thirst for freedom. To his enemies, he was a beast. To his people, he was a shield. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. Vlad's night attack of 1462 remains one of the most daring ambushes in medieval history. He fought an army 10 times his size and forced it to retreat not through strength, but through sheer will and psychological warfare. His actions showed that fear can break armies faster than swords. But his story also shows the cost of such power. The same cruelty that saved his land also destroyed his legacy. History could never decide whether to call him a hero or a monster. Centuries later, when people hear the name Dracula, they think of fangs and darkness. But the real darkness was in the heart of a man who stood against impossible odds. His life was a war between love of country and loss of humanity. Vlad the Impaler was not born evil. He was made by the world he lived in, a world of betrayal, empire, and endless bloodshed. In his shadowed deeds lies a question that still echoes through time. What would you do to save everything you love? The story of Vlad III ends not with triumph or despair, but with a haunting lesson about power itself. Strength without compassion can defend for a time, but it leaves behind only ashes and fear. Vlad's name was carved into history through pain, yet even his enemies could not deny his courage. The world may have changed, but the lesson remains. Those who fight monsters must take care not to become one themselves. Moral: power can defend a nation, but mercy keeps its soul alive. Without mercy, even the greatest defender becomes the very thing he fears.